This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired. Which one? Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 16 edition of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. It is championship week in pretty much all standard fantasy football leagues, unless you're one of those crazy leagues that goes until week 17. I don't like your league, but I still respect you. Anyways, it's championship week for pretty much everyone else. Hopefully, honestly, not everybody's going to be in it. Hopefully you all are, but I'm going to just be honest. In every league, there's only two. So it's just going to work out that way. So I'm going to try to help out you people who are still in it to win it in your championship week. And otherwise, maybe you're playing for the toilet bowl. Maybe if you win your toilet bowl, you actually get the first round pick like we do in my league in the Slackjaws. I think I'm still out of that anyways. But anyways, let's move into week 16 and let's dive right into these matchups. It's a strange week this week since it's obviously a holiday. It's Christmas and everybody's celebrating. Not all the games are on Sunday. Actually, the majority of them are on Saturday. You only get two on Sunday and you still get a classic Monday Night Football game. So we'll start with the Saturday games. You got the Minnesota Vikings taking on the Green Bay Packers, which is a huge game in the NFC North Division, and it's got a ton of players who could make a difference in your fantasy matchups this week. On the Vikings, Sam Bradford, you're not going to start him. If you made it to the fantasy championship with Sam Bradford as your quarterback, then your team has to just be completely stacked, and I commend you for that. But more than likely, you're not putting Sam Bradford in your lineup this week. Adrian Peterson, he returned last week. He's another story, and I'm not sure what he's going to give you. And I think he's still working his way back, and I think the Vikings are pretty much out of it at this point. They can really only play spoiler for the Green Bay Packers. So I'm not sure how much Adrian Peterson could go. I think if you take any risk, you put him in at flex. But that's only if you give nobody else at flex who can give you consistent points. Because while I think there's a high upside for Adrian Peterson, there's also a very, very, very low downside that he could just not play at all, and he could give you a big fat zero. And that's something you can't have in your championship matchup. So I would err on the side of caution, not start Adrian Peterson this week. Stephon Diggs, I think he's at least good for a wide receiver 2. And Kyle Rudolph has been more consistent in the past couple weeks. And I think I would move him into the top 10 of tight ends this week. On the other side of the ball with the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers, he's completely found himself. And I think he's on a mission to lead his Green Bay Packers to try and win in this NFC North. And he's going to do everything in his power to get his team to win. So I think he's going to put up a pretty decent performance this week. And if you're in your championship matchup or whatever matchup you are in this week, Aaron Rodgers should be started. The running backs, I've been saying that it's so unpredictable. And, of course, this would be the week that I would tell you is to start Ty Montgomery. And definitely he's going to have a pretty solid day fantasy-wise. And then, of course, he would go out on Saturday and do nothing. I think you can safely put Ty Montgomery in as a running back too. But just in case, because the Vikings, maybe they do want to play that spoiler role, and Ty Montgomery wouldn't have as big of a day. I don't see him having as big of a day as he had last week, but I could see him getting close to 100 yards, maybe get that touchdown, because they do seem to just be using him more and more. At the wide receiver position, I think it goes as says. With Aaron Rodgers goes all the wide receivers. So I think Jordy Nelson, he's number one. He's the most dependable. And then it's really a toss-up between Devontae Adams and Randall Cobb. But I think both of these, especially in a fantasy championship week, both of those guys are definitely flex considerations because they have the possibility to really blow up. So I would consider those guys at the flex. Next matchup I got for you, I got the Atlanta Falcons traveling traveling to Carolina to take on the Panthers, an NFC South matchup. And it's really a flip-flop of teams from last year to this year. The Atlanta Falcons have been doing really, really well, and the Panthers, they're just not getting it done this year. So with the Falcons, Matt Ryan, I think he's a good start this week. I think he's been one of the top quarterbacks this year in fantasy. And I don't think this is the week, unless you have Tom Brady on your roster or Aaron Rodgers. I think Matt Ryan, you pretty much have to roll with him, and he likely helped you get to this point where you are. So I think Matt Ryan's a good play. I think Devontae Freeman, I predicted him to be the best running back this year again. He didn't make it that high, but he's still in the top 10 of backs. So Devontae Freeman, you're still starting him. Julio Jones, obviously you're starting them. They have a big three. And then they've actually added on another guy in Taylor Gabriel. He can be their big play guy. So I think you put him in at flex, and you hope that he gets one of those long touchdowns. And I think he's a sleeper play. I think he could get you some points in this championship week. On the other side of the ball with the Carolina Panthers, it's a mixed feelings. I don't really feel comfortable with Cam Newton. He has looked a little bit better as of late, but you probably, if you're somebody who drafted Cam Newton, you probably got screwed big time because you spent a high draft pick on him, and he just hasn't produced this year. So Cam Newton, I think he's still in the top 10 of quarterbacks, but I think he's on the outside. He probably has a better chance to land on the outside of the top 10 this week. Jonathan Steward, I think he's an okay as a running back too. As a flex, I think there's other people who could probably do better than him. So keep him in mind when you're in play. I don't like the wide receivers there. Kelvin Benjamin just hasn't performed like he should. And probably the most dependable guy on the Panthers this year has been their tight end, Greg Olsen. He's been Cam Newton's most dependable weapon in that offense, so I think you still start him. He's one of probably the top 5 tight ends in the league, if not the best. So you start him, and he's going to produce for you this week. Next matchup I had the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Oakland Raiders, and this is an important game for both of these guys. The Colts are trying to fight to get into the playoffs, and the Raiders are jockeying for position in that tough AFC West. So both of these teams are going to come hard. And with the Colts, Andrew Luck, I think this could be a battle where it's a high-scoring game. So Andrew Luck, I expect him to have close to 300 yards, a couple of touchdowns. He might give you a couple of interceptions, but you're probably just going to roll with that. I think he's a good enough guy to start in this championship week. And then Frank Gore is, I keep saying it, that he's an old man, but he keeps getting it done. He's a dependable running back too, and I think you play him that way. T.Y. Hilton has been the star on that team, and I think he continues this week. With Andrew Luck goes T.Y. Hilton, and I think they're going to put up some pretty decent numbers in this game. On the opposite side of the ball with the Oakland Raiders, I think they'll have a bounce back this week. Derek Carr, I think you put him in the top 10 of quarterbacks this year. He was one of those quarterbacks when they were coming up with how you draft Tom Brady and who you draft as their backup. And two of those quarterbacks who they said would be the best to pair with Brady was Matt Ryan, who himself has been a stud this year, and the other guy is Derek Carr, and they've both been studs this year. So I think Derek Carr going up against a soft Indianapolis Colts defense. They're at home. I think Derek Carr is going to have a pretty big day this week. And then Latavius Murray, I think he's at least good enough to be a running back 2. He's a low-end running back 1. He's going to put up some numbers against the Colts defense. And then Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree, both of those guys should bounce back this week and have pretty solid matchups. Next matchup I got for you is in the NFC South. You got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going to the Superdome to take on the New Orleans Saints. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jameis Winston, this could actually be a pretty good game for him. And if you're in your fantasy championship, you probably didn't have Jameis Winston as your starter. And it's tough to, if you have one of those guys like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady or Drew Brees that really got you to this point in the league, it would be hard to put Jameis Winston in there. But if you're one of those teams that got in there by just rotating quarterback and playing the matchups, Jameis Winston actually has a really good matchup in this game because the Saints defense gives up a ton of points to quarterbacks. So I really like Jameis Winston this week. I think he could be a sleeper quarterback going into the matchup. And I don't know, he could actually steal some fantasy championships this year. Doug Martin, I think, he's a running back too. He's similar to Frank Gore. He's not as old, but I think you look at him, you don't expect him to get a ton of points. He's not a true running back one, but he's good enough. He's going to get you solid, dependable points. And then Mike Evans is really the one guy that you like on that Tampa Bay receiving core. On the opposite side of the ball with the New Orleans Saints, Drew Brees found the fountain of youth again, and who knows how long he's going to continue to do this, but he's at least continuing to do it this year for you in your fantasy matchups. So I think Drew Brees should conceivably throw for over 300 yards, get a couple touchdowns, and minimize the interceptions, because that's what Drew Brees does. Mark Ingram, he hasn't been as good as of late. This might be one of those games where he's able to pick it back up, and time will only tell, and we'll have to come see Saturday. I think he can be a running back too, and he could be a low-end running back one if you're in a PPR league, because you never know when they're going to add him into the passing offense. And the receivers on the Saints, you got Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas, Willie Snead, and it just goes back and forth of who's going to be the number one guy. It was Michael Thomas for a couple weeks, but then Brandon Cooks broke out last week, had a gigantic game. So who's it going to be this week? I think you put your most money into Brandon Cooks and Michael Thomas, and I think either of those guys could really be dependable wide receiver twos and at times wide receiver ones. And then Willie Snead is really that flex player. He's going to have the ability to either have a gigantic day or just give you absolutely nothing. So I think you start Michael Thomas and Brandon Cooks, and you can depend on them. Willie Snead, not so much. Next matchup I got for you is the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Seattle Seahawks. This is the game earlier in the season where they tied 6-6. So I think both of these teams are in really different situations now. The Seahawks, they're at the close to the top of the NFC, and the Cardinals are essentially out of the playoff race. So you never know. The Cardinals just don't have anything to play for, and the Seahawks they're going to play as hard as they can to try and solidify getting that number 2 seed and getting a first round bye in the playoffs. So I don't really like the Cardinals in this matchup. I think it's going to be a tough game for them. Carson Palmer, he had a resurgence last week because he was playing the horrible, horrible San Francisco 49ers, going up against a much better defense in Seattle. Carson Palmer's not going to have a good day. I think the only person that you can really depend on that Cardinal team is going to be David Johnson, who he's looking a lot like Adrian Peterson when there was nobody else around him in Minnesota. So David Johnson will be the lone bright spot for the Cardinals. Larry Fitzgerald may be able to add something here or there, but it's not going to be huge. I think you can probably put Larry Fitzgerald as a wide receiver too, but anybody else on that team, I don't trust starting them, even as flex considerations. On the opposite side of the ball with the Seattle Seahawks, I think their offense is rolling, and I think coming into this game, they want to win this game, and they want revenge for that tie, because that's really the lone kind of sore spot in this schedule this year. So I think Russell Wilson comes out, he has a big game. I think Thomas Rawls he's going to be limited because the Cardinals are able to shut down running backs. So I think this could be a really big passing day for Russell Wilson. So I like Doug Baldwin and I like Jimmy Graham both to start this week. In this Slackjaw League where I'm playing for nothing, I'm putting in Russell Wilson because I think he has a solid day this week. And Doug Baldwin, I think I'm going to put him in at flex because I want to get that double dip. So that wraps up the Saturday matchups. Let's move on to Christmas Day. You got two really big matchups. First off, you got the Baltimore Ravens going to Pittsburgh to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's going to be it's probably one of the best matchups of these two teams that we've seen in the last couple of years. The Ravens kind of really came out of nowhere this year with a resurgence, and they're putting together a pretty solid season. They're going to be rolling into the playoffs, I would think. I think it would take a collapse on their part to miss the playoffs at this point. So Joe Flacco, you're probably not starting him in your fantasy game, and I'm not really sure if you should be starting any of these Ravens players. You know, you look at their running backs, Terrence West, Kenneth Dixon. I don't like either of these guys, especially this is a bad matchup. I think this is a bad game for them. And the one player that I'd consider starting would be the old man, Steve Smith. I think if anybody puts up some big numbers against the Steelers, I think it's going to be Steve Smith. On the opposite side of the ball with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think it's going to be a tough matchup for them, too. I think Big Ben is going to struggle. I don't see him lighting the lights. I think he could get close to 300 yards, but I don't see him getting a ton of touchdowns. I think they're going to try and pound the rock with their number one running back, Le'Veon Bell. And Le'Veon Bell is going to have a big day. I think he's going to get a ton of touches, and you're going to see he's going to wear down that Raven defense. And then, obviously, Antonio Brown, you're not sitting him this week, and you really shouldn't ever sit Antonio Brown because he can make something out of nothing. And even if Ben Roethlisberger doesn't have a big day, he's still going to get the ball to Antonio Brown. I see him getting at least probably close to 100 yards, and he's going to do everything he can to get a touchdown in this game. And then the Sunday Night Football matchup, you got a big AFC West matchup. The Denver Broncos taking on the Kansas City Chiefs in Arrowhead Stadium. This could be a defensive matchup. You have two of the best defenses in the NFL. I don't see a ton of points scored in this game. This could be a very low-scoring game. And you got guys on the Broncos, Trevor Siemian, Devontae Booker, Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders. And then on the opposite side with the Kansas City Chiefs, Alex Smith, Spencer Ware, Tyreek Hill, Jeremy Maclin, Travis Kelce. I'm just not sure how much points you're going to get out of any of these guys. Trevor Siemian, you're definitely not starting him. Alex Smith for the Chiefs, you're definitely not starting him. So you're not starting either of those quarterbacks. The running backs are a little bit different story. Devontae Booker, he may have given you a late season push in your fantasy rosters. If you have somebody better, I would suggest starting him over Devontae Booker. If not, I think he's going to have a less than stellar day going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. On the opposite side of the ball with the Kansas City Chiefs, I think Spencer Ware, I think he's at least good enough to be a running back too, because he has the ability to give you a good performance, but going up against a tough Broncos defense, I just think he's going to have a rough game. And then Tyreek Hill, he's really come out of nowhere. I think you plug him in, if you got him on your roster, you plug him in at flex, and then you hope that he gives you those big plays, because that's really what you got him for. He gives you those long touchdowns, and he just gives you points. And I'm not going to say that he's going to go out and have a gigantic Le'Veon Bell day where he scores 50 points, but he's going to give you probably the best chance to get a touchdown out of any of your flex players this week. The wide receivers, Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders for the Broncos. If I had to start one of them, I'd go Demaryius Thomas. He's been the guy, even though he's had a down season, he's probably been the most dependable target, and he's going to get you points. And he's a big red zone target if they can get into the red zone this week. And with the Chiefs, even though Jeremy Maclin made an appearance last week, Travis Kelce, the tight end, is really the only guy that I'd want to start between the wide receivers and tight ends for the Chiefs, because he's the one guy that Alex Smith throws to consistently. And the last matchup I got for you, of course, I know you people are saying that, how did he not start off talking about his Detroit Lions? Well, it's because they're playing on Monday Night Football, and it's arguably the biggest game of their season, even though next week's game against the Packers really means a lot more. But anyways, this is Monday Night Football. This is Fantasy Championship Week. Detroit Lions going into Jerry World to take on the Dallas Cowboys. It's going to be a tough matchup. I think this is going to be a hard-fought game. I see with the Lions, Matt Stafford, he was a little flustered last week, and I think some of the weather had something to do with it. The offensive line really wasn't helping out. They had some untimely fumbles by Zach Zenner, who he's dead to me, but that's okay. I think the Lions are going to come out. They're going to be ready to play Monday Night Football. I'm not predicting a win for them, but I think in fantasy they could help you out. Matt Stafford, if he's got you to this point in your fantasy season and you're in your championship with Matthew Stafford, I think you roll with him. I think he's gonna give you solid numbers. I think he's gonna try and minimize his mistakes. I would probably put him for somewhere between 250 to 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, and I'm going to say that he doesn't throw any interceptions, but that there's the possibility that happens. I don't think he's going to give you a huge day, but he's also not going to go the opposite way and give you absolutely nothing. The running back situation is still up in the air. If Theo Riddick is able to play this week, I think you put him in because he is a game changer. When he is able to be on that offense, he really is one of the focal points. It's Golden Tate and it's Theo Riddick. Those are their 2 big targets. When you throw to the wide receiver, you throw to the flat, and you go to Golden Tate. If he's not open, you have Theo Riddick running a circle route, and he's going to give you some chunk yards. And if you're in a PPR league, that is huge points for you. So if Theo Riddick is healthy and he's going to play, I would start Theo Riddick. Marvin Jones, Golden Tate, I think Golden Tate definitely is a wide receiver too. And Marvin Jones, I think, is a flex consideration, especially if, conversely, if there is no Theo Riddick. I think they try and open up the passing game, and that means more downfield passes for Marvin Jones. I think Golden Tate, he's been a probably their focal point of the offense since week 5 going forward. He's been their number 1 target, so I think he's a good play this week. Eric Ebron, that's another guy who's dead to me. He always is dropping balls. He just doesn't work hard enough. I was looking at last week's game. There was like a 3rd and 3, and he caught the ball, with 2 yards to go, and he couldn't just fall forward. He could have just fell forward, and he didn't do that. He got tackled and got pretty much a loss. He got a gain of 0. So Eric Ebron, I wouldn't start him this week because I think the Cowboys do have a pretty solid defense, and that's a team that's going to shut him down. On the opposite side of the ball with the Dallas Cowboys, I think Dak Prescott, again, I think he's actually really similar to Matthew Stafford, that he's not going to give you a huge day, but I think he's going to minimize his mistakes. So I see Dak Prescott getting anywhere. I would say he gets similar numbers, somewhere around 250 to 300 yards, maybe 2 touchdowns at most, and he's probably going to minimize his interceptions. And the upside with Dak Prescott is that he might actually be able to give you a rushing touchdown here, which I guess I could say Matt Stafford may give you a rushing touchdown because anything is on the table for the Lions at this point with their running game. But back to the Cowboys, Dak Prescott, I think he's a dependable guy. You probably, if you have Dak Prescott on your team and you're in the championship at this point, you probably were playing the matchups, and I think this is an interesting matchup on Monday Night Football, and I really like this in a championship game because you have that ultimate trump card that you got your quarterback playing on Monday Night Football, and he could be the deciding factor if you're going to win or if you're going to lose. Obviously, the running backs, Ezekiel Elliott, he's going to probably jump in the Salvation Army bin again, and he's going to be really good at it. As a Lions fan, I am very scared that Ezekiel Elliott could just run for 150 yards and a whole bunch of touchdowns. So he's a really good play this week. And, the wide receivers, they just don't scare me. Dez Bryant, a year ago, or maybe even 2 years ago, he would have scared me. But Dez Bryant this year, I think the Lions should be able to cover him. I think maybe as a flex consideration for Dez, and I don't see the consistency out of the other Cowboy receivers to start them in the biggest game of this season. And Jason Witten, I think he's on the low end of the top 10 for tight ends. So if you got nobody better, you put Jason Witten in, and he's going to give you a good performance. That wraps up the matchups for this week, and that is the last episode of the Fantasy Nerds until the new year. And I hope you enjoyed it. We went from May all the way through the end of the fantasy season. I'll probably come back in the new year. We'll wrap up this stuff. We'll look back at, the crazy stuff that happened. We'll take a look at my King's decrees all those weeks ago that I did during the off season. We'll see how wrong I was or how right I was, and we'll just wrap it up. I really appreciate everybody sticking through and listening, and just being a part of this. And fantasy football is a big part of my life, and I thank you for letting me be a part of your guys' lives. I will see you guys in the new year. Until then, later, nerds.